In April 1964, a woman dressed like a nurse walked into a hospital room in Chicago. She told the new mother that the doctor needed to see the baby for more tests. The mother handed the baby over. The nurse walked out of the room and then vanished without a trace. It set off one of the largest manhunts in Chicago. And that's only the beginning. I'm Paul Fronczak. I was that baby.
And I'm Tracy Hastings. This season of Fronczak Files will take you on a journey, following the twists and turns of Paul's story.
Many of you may have heard my story on other podcasts or other TV shows and things like that. But at the end of the day, you really don't know Jack. Welcome to the Fronczak Files. You know, I don't want this show to be just another audiobook, spitting out facts about what happened. The story was very tragic, and people know that. But what they don't know is what really happened behind the scenes. How did it affect people? How did people feel? What, like my parents, when they went through this, what do you think is going through someone's mind? All those things you can't get with just the facts. All right, so are we going to start with 1974?
Yeah, let's start there.
All right, so Tracy, for 1974, can you set the scene?
Sure. Watergate, big story that year. The break-in at the Democratic National Convention at the Watergate Hotel. People trying to wiretap phones and steal information to assist Nixon in his re-election campaign.
Yeah.
And, I know you're a movie guy. I know you watch a lot of films. Got a background in acting. Top films of 1974. The Godfather Part 2. You a Pacino fan?
Oh, hoorah! Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And so right about this time, you're what, like 10 or so?
I was 10 in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
That's where this journey really started. This is where my life kind of took. There was a movie called Sliding Doors a while ago about how your life could change in a matter of seconds if you just take a different route. And I decided to take a route that changed my life forever, and it's still being changed today.
Well, why don't you tell us about that, Paul?
All right, so in 1974, we already set the scene, but it was Christmas time. My street was like a Rockwell painting. I grew up in Oak Lawn, the south side of Chicago, mostly working class, Irish, Polish. And Christmas time was like, I used to get up early after a fresh snow, because it was cold out, but just to walk up and down, be the first footprints in that snow, look at all the lights because the sun hasn't come up yet. It's just those memories are forever ingrained, and that to me is what Christmas still is to this day. Except I live in Las Vegas and there isn't much snow.
But there's a lot of lights.
A lot of lights. Yeah. Okay, so my dad was at work. He was a machinist. He worked for Foot Brothers. They made transmissions for helicopters and things, for the military. A lot of, Department of Defense contracts. My mom was upstairs doing something, dishes, cleaning. She was always cleaning. I mean, the house was, when I mentioned a Rockwell painting, it was really like that. So I was downstairs looking for Christmas presents. I thought this is a great time to maybe sneak inside that crawl space. Kind of a scary crawl space. I actually have pictures on my board behind me, and actually I think we'll put them on the website. I moved the couch. I opened a little 3x4 crawl space door, and I kind of scanned the entire room. It was dark, but I thought, if they have presents for us, they're going to be in here.
Had you looked in there before?
Not for Christmas presents,
Snooped, though. Snooped around.
Yeah, I've always been kind of a snooper. I like to, I don't know why. Maybe, I guess we'll get to that later, right?
Right.
I turned on the light, and I scanned around looking at, in the back, I saw a bunch of boxes. And I thought, this is it. This is the big score for Christmas. So I kind of low crawled because the ceiling was really low and there were spider webs and, nails sticking out of the floor, which is scary, right? But I'm like, you know what? Spiders are Christmas presents. I think I'll take the heat. Yeah. So I crawled back and I found the boxes. And I opened the first box and I didn't see Christmas presents. I saw newspaper clippings. And I was like, what? This is not Christmas. What is this, right? So I grabbed one. I
Yeah.
started looking at it. And there was these things on the wall right behind me. All these headlines from papers all over the country, but mostly in Chicago, because that's where this whole event happened that I was going to read about. So I look at the first headline, Sad City Hunt Drags On for Missing Kidnapped Child. 10,000 FBI agents or police all looking for this kidnapped child. I was like, okay, so someone was kidnapped. And then I saw a picture of my mom and dad, and they looked really, really sad. They were, crying, and it looked like they hadn't slept in a long time. And it said, the hunt for Paul Joseph Fronczak drags on. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. That's me, Paul Joseph Fronczak, and those are my parents in that picture. So I got real excited. Okay, I kind of forgot about the Christmas presents. I grabbed one of the headlines, and I ran upstairs to my mom. And I was all excited, and I was like, Mom, what is this? I mean, I read her the headline. She stopped what she was doing. She turned around, she looked at me. She saw what was in my hand, and her face went from, a normal, kind person to this rage. And she simply said, how dare you snoop around this house? Those aren't your things. I said, but wait a minute, this is about me, right? This kidnapping? Paul Joseph Fronczak? She said, you were kidnapped. We found you. We love you. That's all there is to talk about this. And I was like completely deflated because I was like excited. I'm 10 years old. This is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I know my parents. When they said something, they meant it. And I wasn't going to talk back. And I thought, okay. So I walked away. We never talked about it again, but I never forgot. And I kept those paper clippings with me.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of these newspaper clippings that I'm imagining you saw while you were going through those boxes. And I want to read some of it. But first, why don't we hear a little bit about your mom and dad, since they're a big part of this story this season. Tell us about them. What kind of people are they?
So my mom was from a little town called Escanaba, Michigan, in the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. She was in a family of 10 children. They had 2 bedrooms. They had an outhouse. And if you Google the weather in Escanaba in the winter, it's winter for like 9 months a year with nothing but snow and torrential wind and just horrible. So my mom told me stories growing up as a little girl, having to run outside in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom in that outhouse. And then she said later in life, when they upgraded, they actually put in a bathtub in the basement. But it wasn't a running water bathtub. They had to fill it with jugs of water.
Oh, my God. I mean, people can't even imagine that now.
I tell my daughter that, and she's like, get out of here. You're making this up.
Yeah, what?
There's a Little House on the Prairie.
No kidding.
So my mom was lucky because she was the youngest out of 10. So she got to take her bath first. But they weren't changing the water. So by the time you were the 10th, you were probably like, you know what? I think I'm good. I don't need to get in
probably.
there, Yeah, so it was a different time. So my mom grew up with those values. My dad, both his parents were from Poland. So he grew up in Chicago, South Side. He went in the military, came back, and he worked as a machinist. And one day, he grew up in Brighton Park, which is, kind of a cool... A little side note, what was Opie's name? Ron Howard shot a movie
Ron Howard.
Shot a movie called Backdraft. 2 blocks from my grandma's house. They used the firehouse that was right there. And my grandma would sneak over there and sneak into the craft service area and get all the food. And she actually befriended Ron Howard and his wife, which I thought was pretty funny. So it was a quaint little neighborhood, Brighton Park. My mom worked in the bank there. She had moved from Escanaba to Chicago as quick as she could, as soon as she got out of high school, because nobody wanted to grow up in Escanaba.
Who could blame a girl?
Right.
Absolutely.
So her and her older sister moved to Chicago. My mom got a job working in the bank there. And my dad, who lived about a block and a half away, would do all his banking there. And one day he walked in the bank and he saw Dora. And he's like, wow, this is, I've got to go out with this girl. So he asked her out. And of course she said, no way, right? So my dad, being the persistent guy that he is, he did that for 5 years. Kept trying to get her to go out with him, right?
Yeah, wow.
And my mom said that one day she was like, you know what? where is that guy Chester? I've seen him a couple of days. He hasn't asked me out. So she had just bought a new car. She was driving down the street. She saw him crossing the street. So she pulled over and yelled at him, "Hey, you want to go out?" And Chester said, "Oh my God, yeah." And they have been together ever since.
Okay, I love your mom. What a strong woman. Like she bought her a car, her by herself at this time when, it was not easy for women to buy things on their own without having a man on a loan, without having a man on a title. Yeah. And she did it. And then she asked him out. I like your mom already.
Yeah, she's stronger than you'll ever know. Yeah.
She had to be.
Yeah, so Tracy, I think you actually have some of the clippings that I pulled out of the box.
I do. I have copies of some of them. There's one that I'm looking at here, dated Chicago, April 28th. Headline, "Baby Stolen at Hospital." And it reads, "Hundreds of policemen combed a Southside neighborhood house to house today for a 2-day-old baby boy abducted from his mother's arms in Michael Reese Hospital. The mother, Mrs. Dora Fronczak, 28, told police she was feeding her baby when a woman dressed as a nurse entered and took the infant, saying it had to be returned to the nursery. When a nurse asked Mrs. Fronczak for the child a short time later, the abduction was discovered and the police were called. The infant is the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Chester S. Fronczak Jr. of Chicago. Fronczak, an aircraft machinist, broke the news to his wife that the baby, Paul Joseph, had been stolen. The hospital does not make a practice of making footprints of newborn infants. That could handicap police if the infant is missing for some time."
All right, so that pretty much takes us into what really happened. So I think, Tracy, we should go back to 1964.
Sure. We'll go back even a decade further. The 60s. Who wasn't confused in the 60s, right? Time of profound change. Social and political ideals were shifting. The country's moving more from a traditional way of living into a more modern way. And growing pains are always hard. And so the Civil Rights Amendment allowed for integration in schools. It made employment discrimination illegal and started us on the path to equality in this country. We were also in the middle of the Cold War. And I remember this. I remember as a kid doing nuclear bomb drills, right? Hide under your desk because that's going to protect you from the nuclear bomb going off. Go into the hallways and put your head up against the wall and shelter in place. Yeah. So, we're getting this false sense of security from the adults around us that if there's a nuclear war, you'll be fine. Hide under your desk. And music, #1 song on April 27th, 1964.
Let me guess. I'm going to say the Beatles.
It is a Beatles tune.
Which one?
"I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Of course.
And on April 26th, at Michael Reese Hospital in Chicago, Paul Joseph Fronczak was born to Chester and Dora.
So, of course, Chester and Dora wanted to start a family. So they decided to have a child. And when they had their first child, it was a stillborn. So they were devastated. I mean, nobody wants to not go home with the child, right? After giving birth. So they were elated to be pregnant and to be having Paul Joseph. This is going to be like that my mom later said, they put all their hopes and dreams into this child. So my mom gives birth. It's a healthy, healthy boy. She was 28. My dad was 33. Paul was 7 pounds, 2 ounces in room 418. Everything was fine. April 26th. April 27th, Paul was in the nursery, as with back then, when I had my daughter out here, we never left the room. We kept her, and, the next day we took her home, and we knew that she was our child. Back then, they would take the baby away, put it in a nursery with all the other babies. And I mean, to me right there, what could go wrong, right? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of things can go wrong with that situation.
For sure. But, at the time, there was a real false sense of security. The nursery is a secure place. There's people watching. What could possibly happen?
And ironically, they had no security, right?
Exactly. Compared to what we have today, for sure.
Yeah. So it was April 27th. Paul was less than a day old. The nurse brought Paul from the nursery to Dora for feeding time. Everything's happy. Dora, my mom, was extremely happy. This is everything she's wanted, right? So she's feeding the baby. This nurse walks in and tells her that the doctor needs to see the baby for more testing. My mom thought it was strange that a nurse would want to take the baby away during feeding because it's such a precious time and the baby needs to eat, right? So she handed the baby over because it's a nurse in a hospital. And that's what you do. She handed that baby over. The nurse took the baby, left that room, went down a few flights of stairs, and then jumped into a cab that was waiting outside. It vanished without a trace. The hospital was totally unaware of what's going on. As a matter of fact, it was almost an hour or so before they noticed the baby was even missing. And then to make it worse, they thought the baby was just misplaced. So they decided to not tell Mrs. Fronczak. They decided to just spend a few hours looking for the baby. And the baby was taken about 10 o'clock in the morning. They didn't notify the police till 3 in the afternoon. And they didn't even tell Mrs. Fronczak. They called my dad at work and told him, your baby's gone. You need to come and tell your wife. My dad was at work in the machine shop because back then there was no such thing as maternity leave. He had to go and do his shift. He was handing out cigars with his buddies. And then he gets this call. So he has to race down to the hospital to tell his wife, who's totally happy because she's waiting, for her child to come back for the next feeding, that the baby's not coming back. The baby's gone. And then as soon as he said that, all the FBI and the police just charged into the room. Reporters just snapping pictures and, screaming out questions and, all this. My mom didn't know what the hell was going on. She had just been told the most horrible news that you could ever imagine. And then she's flooded with the media. And to this day, she really hates the media. But I don't blame her, It's ironic how we actually use the media later down the road. But the whole thing happened, and it was bizarre. Within a couple of hours, the FBI had scrambled all these police officers. The postal workers took 120,000 letter carriers. They had them going door to door, knocking on doors, trying to find this kidnapped baby. Lee Kelsey was the cab driver that happened to be the unlucky one to pick up the kidnapper. When she had ordered the cab, she had told him to meet her by a different wing, different name. He said, that's not Michael Reese Hospital. So then she corrected herself and said, meet me at the back doors. She came out with the baby, wrapped in the blanket, jumped in the cab. He took her down to 35th and Halstead. She got out, and he said he saw her get into another car and take off. And that was it. She just vanished. Later, when he was interviewed, this poor guy, he ended up being dragged in for all kinds of, whenever they found someone that they thought was the kidnapper, they brought him in to do an eyewitness, what do they call it? When you recognize the person, is that the person? And he's like, no, right? So anyway, so he said that he had seen this lady numerous times around that neighborhood. So she must have had something to do with that area, whether she lived there or was staying with somebody. But I think back on Lee Kelsey, and I feel bad for him because that really changed his life. Plus probably the feeling that he had inside, knowing that he picked up a kidnapper that just stole a baby. That's something that it's been on my mind lately, and it's kind of hard to shake. This whole story has affected so many people over the years, and I found that the people never really got over it. It's always been a part of them. And that's what I was talking about when this is a journey, not just like an audiobook full of facts, but how it actually affects people and the human emotion that's tied into something like this, to a tragedy. So in addition to the human element of having your child kidnapped and everyone else that's involved with it, how about the failure of the institution?
That's very blatant and very obvious when we look back on it through our lens from today. As a high-risk obstetrical nurse for 18 years, I have seen security for infants evolve just in the last 18 years. It has changed and improved. It was non-existent in 1964. Today, babies are footprinted within their first hour of life. Babies are banded. We have double bands on babies. One goes on a wrist, one goes on an ankle. We do that because babies tend to lose weight in the first few days after they're born, and they could wiggle themselves out of one of those ID bands. So we never want a baby that's not identified in some way. Parents are given matching bands, or the mom and then someone of her choice has a matching band. Numbers match, names match, everything has to line up in order for us to hand a baby over to a mother. And as far as culturally, for a labor and delivery, we no longer have nurseries in most of our hospitals. Babies stay at the bedside now. Everything is done at the bedside. Bathing, medications, assessments. And if the babies do need to go somewhere for more invasive testing, a person is allowed to go with them. An adult who has the band can accompany that baby to whatever procedure it might be, whether it's an X-ray or to the operating room, any of those type of things. So babies are also given a security device on the opposite ankle, which is a Bluetooth device that is hooked up to a security system. And babies have to be cleared to go down certain hallways, near certain doors. Like all stairwell doors are a trigger. If a baby is wheeled near a stairwell door, it will start sounding a very loud alarm. Everyone on the floor scrambles to find what's called a code pink location. Every hospital has plaques on the wall that identify where those code pink locations are. And staff members are drilled regularly for how to find those places and stand guard. Don't let anybody leave the floor.
Hey, Tracy, can I ask what prompted Code Pink?
Well, the interesting story here is the kidnapping in 1964.
Which one was that?
That would be your kidnapping.
The Fronczak kidnapping.
Is what started this whole process of slowly evolving security for babies in the hospital. And it was still slow. This stuff didn't happen overnight. It was still a slow process because I think most people thought this was an anomaly. This is something that is unusual. This is not the common normal thing. So it was still slow at that point. And so hospitals are very diligent about this now, about keeping babies safe. All labor and delivery units are locked. We have badges that we have to badge in with, and the doors will unlock. People are interviewed essentially before they come on the floor. Who are you here to see? What room are they in? We want names, we want location, so that we know that people that are coming onto the floor are actually family members or people that can be trusted to be on the floor.
So you're saying out of this horrible tragedy, something good actually came out of it?
It did.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
We have, there's some statistics from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children about babies that are abducted. They consider an infant abduction to be the abduction of any child under 1 year of age. And this abduction can take various forms, from being abducted from like a non-custodial parent to a stranger abduction, to being abducted from the hospital, from their home, or in a public place. And there are several numbers that they have compiled. Total abductions of infants related to healthcare confirmed by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children from 1964 to January of 2025 in the U.S., 1964 being this case. There's been 140 children taken from healthcare facilities in that time.
Wow. When
you think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of babies that have been born since then, 140 isn't a lot, but it's 140 too many.
Well said. Yeah. So thanks for those facts, by the way. It's very eye-opening. It's very sad, but at least there's hope. And I like that. So the funny thing about the nurse, a lot of people saw her, but the hospital never really bothered to try to get descriptions of her right away. They just thought the baby was misplaced. So when the police came in, they had their sketch artist, Otis Rathel, come in and do a quick sketch of what a couple of people that saw the kidnapper, what she might look like. 35 to 45 years old, around 5'3", kind of brownish, grayish hair, graying hair, no scars, just a regular person, could be anybody. But Joyce Doan, who was the patient next to Dora, my mom in the hospital, said that she looked like a very uncaring person that probably didn't like children. And I thought that was pretty interesting, right? I know a lot of times people go, well, maybe it's someone who just wanted a child. But someone with that description to me isn't somebody that wanted a child. And she was seen for a couple of days before the kidnapping looking at different babies, almost like she was shopping for that perfect one. And then when she found the one that she thought would fit the bill, Paul, then she decided, okay, I need to just grab this baby and run.
Yeah, at the time, there was no such thing as profiling criminals. That was not a done thing. So people were relying just on their physical attributes to see if people would recognize them. But today, after years of study in this field and profiling what type of a person would take a baby, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they've released some information about what type of a woman could be an abductor. And they typically are all of childbearing age. They are most likely compulsive. They rely a lot on manipulation, lying, and deception to get what they want, which I'm sure describes a lot of people. And people will say that they hear these women talk about they've lost a baby or they're incapable of having one. This becomes a big theme in their life. They either have had a stillbirth or a miscarriage or have been told that they're infertile. And this could drive their need to abduct a child. Oddly enough, they're often married or they're often collaborating with someone else. And this can feed into their desire to give their companion a child. If they're unable to do so, they could be driven to take a baby in order to please their partner. This is something that the partner wants. Oftentimes, they live in the community where the abduction has taken place. That's very common, which makes sense. They would know the streets. They would know the ways to get away. They'd be able to watch comings and goings. They were frequent visitors to their nursery or the maternity units at more than one healthcare facility in the area prior to the abduction. And they were asking a lot of questions. And we know that this nurse had gone into more than just your mother's room to look at baby Paul. It was reported that she was in other rooms as well, taking down blankets, looking at babies, turning on her heel and walking out and saying nothing. Like you said, almost shopping for a baby. Like she knew what baby she was looking for.
They even had sightings from different hospitals of the same lady.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this plays right into that profile that they are scouting out other hospitals as well. Which is the place that's going to be the easiest for me to take a baby? They ask a lot of questions about procedures, about the maternity floor layout. They use fire exit stairwells to escape because these are not guarded. They're easy ways to get out. And occasionally these babies are abducted from the home setting as well, but predominantly from a hospital. And the abductions are usually well planned. This is not something that is done on the fly. They usually have targeted a baby and they're just going to wait for their moment to take them. And though this can describe a lot of people, a lot of women, in the setting of security on a labor and delivery floor, this is a very dangerous person.
And I mean, just ballsy alone, right? Just to be able to do that. To talk to the mother face to face, I need to take your baby.
I'm literally stealing your child.
And then just walk out, right? And I still feel bad. There's Lee Kelsey is in the picture. He's the cab driver right there. Yeah. And I really feel bad for him and his family that he had to go through that. And he was just an innocent bystander, just doing his job, trying to pay his bills, picking up a fare, right? And who knew that little thing would change his life in the way it did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This one person.
It's so crazy.
Who turned everyone's life upside down.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine what your parents must have been feeling at this point in time with losing a second baby. And, from what I understand, your dad didn't seem like a very emotional guy. He didn't talk about his feelings very much, from what I understand about him. But there's some really touching quotes in the newspaper that he was able to give when reporters were asking him how he felt about all of this and what was happening. And simple and to the point, he says, please take care of the baby and return him, almost begging to please bring that child back. He also is quoted as stating, I just want to plead for the kidnapper to take care of the baby and to return him. She should give him formula. There's a recipe for that in the newspaper. Please take care of our baby. So it just sort of speaks to a parent's desire to care for their child. The child is not present and they're still agonizing over this baby being cared for.
One reporter in a story actually said that She was a mother for the second time, going home with no children. It's just heartless to even put that in print. So Dora stayed in the hospital for 5 days after the kidnapping. 5 days. She kept hoping that whoever took Paul would bring him back to the hospital. And then eventually she said, you know what, I've got to go home. I've got to start living my life again, even though she didn't want to. So I can't even imagine just being in that hospital for 5 days. The thing that really got me was when Paul was taken and the hospital knew, they had a student nurse, Mary Trenchard. She was a student nurse, and they told her, the baby's gone, but do not let Mrs. Fronczak know. Take her through all the classes, business as usual, because the baby's probably just misplaced. We'll find him, and everything will be fine. But she knew that baby was gone. And I got to meet her, and she hugged me, and you could still feel that with her, that this has been with her whole life, that she did that. And you can't shake something like that. Once again, when something like this happens, it just doesn't affect one or two people. It affects everyone. It's a chain reaction. And when you're starting out your nursing career and you're told to lie to a patient and then cover it up like that, that's insane. And she stayed a nurse, and she retired, an amazing nurse, it's fantastic. And I was hoping to get her on the show, but it just didn't work out. But just to meet her, someone that was actually there living through this, it's incredible, and it gives you hope in humanity.
I really feel for Mary as a nurse myself. I feel how devastating that must be to feel like you took part in something like this, that you didn't know enough to stop it. You didn't realize it was happening. And as a young nurse just starting out, like you said, to be asked to lie to a patient, that does not set a good precedence for a career as an RN. Also, that whole subterfuge, just to keep up the lie, to keep it propped up so that they could try to recover this baby. That would never happen today. From what you tell me about Mary, I wish that I had been able to meet her. I wish she was able to come on the show and be able to talk to us herself and tell us her story. If I could speak to her, I would just like to tell her thank you. Because even though she experienced the trauma of being a part of this event and it carried it with her whole life, she was also an integral part of the change that took place in caring for moms and babies and their safety. And that cannot be replaced. And so it's a lifelong burden that she has carried to have been part of it, but it's also been huge for change.
Yeah, it's you're making me tear up a little bit here.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then you have that aspect of it, and then you actually have the whole city of Chicago coming together, right? Trying to find this baby that was kidnapped from a hospital. 200 police and FBI descended upon the city. Thousands of homes were searched. I can't believe how much manpower they invested into actually trying to find this child. As a matter of fact, Susan Nolan reached out to me. Her dad was actually John Norris. He was a beat cop in Chicago and then became a desk sergeant. His whole career, he dealt with thousands of cases throughout his career. There was only one case that he actually made part of his life. He actually took it home with him. And I'm going to show you this. She actually gave me this file that he kept in his home. Okay, this is the actual police file on the Fronczak kidnapping. And inside, it's just, this is the original pictures that the hospital took of Paul. They didn't have time to blood type him or get a footprint, but they had time for this glamour shot. Right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
And more on that later. But I spent a whole day just going through these files. And here's the thing. This isn't like today's police work. Everything is handwritten.
Yeah, look at that. No computers. Everything was done by hand.
Or typed very poorly. just the typing. I mean, just the time alone that they took to type this stuff. And you can see, I mean, there's just pages and pages of all these accounts.
Yeah, the file is huge. It's a huge file.
They had fake ransom notices going in, The cops they were chasing down people that, were trying to get ransom money. People would phone in tips about, this woman was found in a subway platform. And the subway, they had the trains in Chicago. And of course, whenever they brought someone in to a station, they had to bring Lee Kelsey and the cab driver again to try to identify them.
Sure, re-traumatize him
over
again.
and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things, it's just to me, it's just mind-boggling how much effort they put into trying to find this kidnapped child.
Yeah, when I was reading about it, I was reading like numbers like that they were looking at like 2,600 hospital employees, something crazy like that, looking for people with like mental health issues, nurses who had maybe lost a child or were unable to have children of their own, assuming that this woman might actually have been a nurse because she seemed to know so much about how the hospital functioned. And, thinking about taking a baby out of a glassed-in nursery, it's far easier to take a baby out of a mother's arms in the room. So this had all been thought out. So they were looking at who would have known, who would have had this information, going through 18 months of hospital records of women who had stillborn babies at the hospital, wondering if maybe one of them might have disguised themselves and come in to take the baby. It was almost like all of Chicago was mobilized.
So when Dora and Chester finally went home, they had the FBI staying with them. They had two really good agents. They had Bernie Carey and Ronald Miniter. They were there to tape calls, any ransom phone calls that might come in, any tips, just to be ready for anything. And my parents had a small apartment, so they would stay towards the back or downstairs in my dad's parents' house. And whenever something would happen, they'd run upstairs and talk to him. And I remember I actually got to talk with Bernie Carey before he passed away. Him and my parents became really good friends. I mean, how could you not bond over something like this, right? I mean, if you can't bond over a kidnapping, what can you bond over? I'm kidding.
Facts.
I'm kidding. But I remember him saying that my mom would, he said that it was the most despairing, just the saddest atmosphere he's ever been in his entire career. And he said he had a feeling back then that they would never find that child. But remember that even through that emotional sadness, that my mom would bring them food downstairs. She'd bake cookies or bring them something. And he said he loved that part. Those fleeting moments of I'm not going to say happiness, but less despair.
Well, I think your mom is a caregiver, and this was helping her to channel her grief because she was able to care for someone, channel that loss.
Yeah, I agree totally. And then after time went by, Mother's Day came and went, nothing. No ransom calls, no tips. A year goes by, nothing. The FBI's pulled back. They're working other cases now. The headlines stopped talking about it. After the first year, they said, the papers talked about the anniversary, 1 year since the kidnapping, stuff like that. Just, kind of reopening that wound for my parents. And then after a year or so, it kind of just faded away. No one talked about it. My mom never gave up hope. She just kept hoping one day something would happen. But nothing did. 2 years go by. Nothing. Shortly after 2 years, they get a phone call. And that became something bigger than we ever thought.
A phone call? What kind of phone call?
I'm glad you asked that question, Tracy. But unfortunately, we're out of time and the files are closed.
So next week and through the rest of the season, we are going to be on a journey where we're going to be introduced to a lot of different topics that pertain to this case. Genetic genealogy is one of a new and emerging science in finding people that have gone missing. And we have team members who are outstandingly good genetic genealogists who are going to be helping us as we move forward in helping people solve their mysteries.
Just when you think you know what's going to happen next, you don't. There are so many twists and turns in this story. Even I can't believe it. And it's my story. We'll see you next week.
The Fronczak Files is created and hosted by Paul Jack Fronczak. Co-hosted by me, Tracy Hastings. Produced and edited by Gavin Bogner. Lead genetic genealogist, Emily Ripper. Lead historical researcher, Colleen Newhart. Social media manager, Amy Morris. Original theme music written and produced by Paul Jack Fronczak and Rick Howland. Thank you for joining us on the journey, and please remember to subscribe.